I stopped in the middle of the kitchen with her sneakers in my hands. They were white trainers with pale gray soles, the pair Lily had started wearing every morning a few months earlier when she decided she was going to get back in shape. At 5 in the morning, she had just come through the front door, dropped her bag beside the wall, and gone straight to the shower without saying much more than a tired good morning. The water was already running upstairs. I was standing there barefoot on the cold tile, holding the shoes she'd kicked off by the mat. They were perfectly clean. Again, I turned one over in my hand and ran my thumb across the bottom, slow and deliberate, like maybe I'd missed something the first time. No dust packed into the grooves. No thin line of dirt around the edges. No wet grit from the sidewalk. Not even the faint film you get from pavement before sunrise when the air still holds onto the night. Nothing. Just clean rubber. For a few seconds I stood there listening to the shower pipes hum through the walls and felt something inside me go very still. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It wasn't even shock. It was quieter than that. Heavier. Because suspicion still leaves room for hope. A guess can be argued with. You can explain away a strange feeling if you want it badly enough. But this felt different. This felt like reaching for something in the dark and finding out it had been gone for a long time. I looked at the front door, then back at the shoes in my hands. She said she'd been running. She had said it so many times it had started to sound normal. Healthy. Disciplined. A new routine. But standing there in that dim kitchen light, with the house half asleep and her spotless sneakers in my grip, I had this sudden, sickening feeling that I was no longer uncovering a lie. I was arriving late to a truth that had already been living in my house. My name is Tom. I'm 35, and for most of my adult life, I've worked in operations, logistics, scheduling, keeping systems running the way they're supposed to. I don't rush decisions. I don't jump to conclusions. I look at patterns, adjust when something doesn't fit, and keep things moving. That approach carried into my marriage. Lily is 32. When we moved to Austin 2 years ago for my job, she adapted faster than I did. New city, new routines, new people. She stepped into it like she'd been waiting for the change. Within a few months, she had her own rhythm. Coffee shops, small friend groups, classes I never quite kept track of. She filled her time easily. I was working longer hours back then, building out a new team, stabilizing a messy transition. It made sense that she needed her own structure. The morning run started about 6 months ago. She framed it simply. Said she wanted to feel better, get back into shape, clear her head before the day started. 5 a.m. alarms. Quiet exits. Back before 7. Showered, composed, already ahead of the day. It sounded disciplined. Healthy. I didn't question it. If anything, I supported it. I adjusted my schedule where I could, handled more of the dinners, made sure things were easier in the evenings so she could rest. I respected that she wanted something that was hers. Looking back, there were things that didn't line up. Small things. She was always tired, but not the kind of tired that follows physical effort. It was different. More like she hadn't slept well. Her energy didn't match someone building endurance over time. No gradual progress. No small improvements you usually notice when someone sticks to a routine. And the results never showed. Same weight. Same tone. No real change, despite the consistency she claimed. I noticed it, but I didn't press. There was also the way she reacted the one time I suggested joining her. It was casual. I said I could wake up early, go with her, try to get back into running myself. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Said it was her space, her time to be alone, that it helped her think. I backed off immediately. That part made sense to me. Not everything in a marriage needs to be shared. People need their own routines. So I let it sit. Ignored the details that didn't fit cleanly. Because when something looks close enough to normal, you don't tear it apart just to see what's underneath. It didn't come together all at once. There wasn't a single moment where everything made sense and the whole structure collapsed. It was slower than that. A series of small things that didn't connect at first, then started to overlap in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. The sneakers were just the first detail I stopped explaining away. After that, I began noticing the timing more closely. She always left at the same minute. Not around 5. Not early. Exactly 5. The kind of consistency that doesn't come from motivation, but from something scheduled. Her fatigue stayed the same. No variation. No good days after a lighter run, no worse days after a longer one. Just a steady, flat exhaustion that didn't match effort. And then there was her reaction to disruption. A week after the morning with the sneakers, I mentioned, again, casually, that I might start waking up earlier. Not even to run with her, just to reset my own routine. Maybe make coffee, ease into the day differently. She paused. It was brief. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. But I did. Her hand stopped mid-motion, just for a second, before she set her mug down. Then she nodded, said that sounded like a good idea. Encouraging, even. But something about it felt off. Not what she said, how she said it. Controlled. Measured. Like she was adjusting to a variable she hadn't planned for. That was the moment the pattern shifted for me. Up until then, I had been taking each detail on its own, finding reasonable explanations, keeping everything inside the boundaries of what made sense. But once I stepped back and looked at it as a whole, it stopped looking like a routine. It looked maintained. Carefully. The kind of consistency that isn't natural, but built. Repeated on purpose. Protected. I didn't jump to conclusions. I didn't assign meaning where I didn't have proof. But I also stopped doing something I hadn't realized I'd been doing the entire time. I stopped defending it in my own head. I didn't tell myself she was just tired anymore. I didn't explain the lack of results. I didn't soften the edges of what I was seeing. I just let the details exist as they were. And once I did that, the routine stopped feeling like something she was building for herself. It started feeling like something she was keeping in place. I stopped asking questions. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. Not abruptly. Not in a way that would stand out. It was quieter than that. More like removing pressure from something I'd been leaning on without realizing it. I didn't bring up the runs anymore. Didn't offer to join. Didn't make small comments about weather or timing or how early it was getting. On the outside, nothing changed. I still woke up when she came back. Still stood in the kitchen some mornings, making coffee while she moved through the same routine, bag by the door, shoes off, straight upstairs. I still asked how her day looked, whether she needed anything from the store, if she'd be home on time. All the normal pieces stayed in place. But internally, something had shifted into a different position. I wasn't trying to understand her anymore. That part had been automatic before. Every inconsistency, every small disconnect, I'd been working to smooth it out, to make it fit into something reasonable. That effort stopped. I didn't replace it with suspicion or confrontation. I just let the gaps stay open. And in those gaps, something clearer started to form. I began separating what I was told from what I could verify. Not aggressively. Not like an investigation. Just small mental notes. Times. Sequences. Repetition. She said she ran every morning. What I knew was that she left at 5, returned before 7, and came back looking a certain way. Tired, but not physically worn. Composed, but slightly off. Those two things were no longer the same. I didn't need to prove anything yet. That wasn't the point. The point was recognizing that the version of events I'd been given and the reality I was observing were no longer aligned. Once you see that clearly, you stop reacting. You stop reaching for reassurance or explanations. You just watch. I found that easier than I expected. There was a kind of control in it. Not control over her, but over myself. I didn't feel the need to interrupt what was happening. Whatever the truth was, it already existed. Whether I pushed against it or not wouldn't change that. So I let things continue exactly as they were. Same mornings. Same routine. Same quiet exits and returns. The only difference was that I was no longer participating in the story she was telling. I was observing the one that was actually unfolding. Once I stopped questioning it, the details became easier to track. Not because I was looking harder, but because I wasn't trying to interpret anything anymore. I let things repeat. That was enough. She left every morning at the same time. 5 sharp. Not 5:02. Not 5:10. Exactly 5. The kind of precision you don't maintain unless something depends on it. She always took the same bag. Black, soft-sided, small enough to pass as a gym bag without drawing attention. It never changed. Never rotated out like most people do with things they use daily. It stayed consistent, like part of a uniform. Her phone never stayed behind. That was another constant. Even on mornings when she forgot small things, hair tie, water bottle, keys once, she never forgot her phone. It was always in her hand when she left, always with her when she came back. I didn't touch it, didn't check it. I didn't need to. Patterns were enough. The first actual break in routine didn't come from her. It came from something she'd stopped using. One evening, I was going through a drawer in the living room looking for a charger and found her old fitness tracker, the one she used to wear before switching to something newer. It had been sitting there for months, untouched. Out of habit, I picked it up. The battery was dead, but when I plugged it in, it powered on immediately. It synced automatically to the paired account. No password needed. No extra steps. Just data. I didn't go through everything. I wasn't interested in months of history. I only needed to see enough to understand whether the pattern held. It didn't. The recorded routes weren't random. They weren't varied. They didn't branch out across different streets or loop through parks the way runners usually do. They led in one direction. Every time. The same general path. Same turns. Same endpoint. Not a park. Not a gym. Not a trail. A neighborhood. And not just the neighborhood, it narrowed further. The routes didn't stop broadly within that area. They ended near the same cluster of streets. Repeatedly. I didn't zoom in immediately. I just watched the repetition. Day after day, the path was almost identical. Slight variations in timing, but the destination remained constant. Like whatever she was doing required consistency more than distance. I set the tracker back where I found it. Didn't take a screenshot. Didn't copy anything. I didn't need to. Because once something repeats enough times, it stops being a coincidence. It becomes a location. And once you have a location, you don't need to guess what's happening anymore. You just need to decide when you're ready to look at it directly. I didn't check the address right away. For a couple of days, I let the information sit where it was. Not because I was avoiding it, but because I wanted to be sure I wasn't rushing the process. Once you move from pattern to confirmation, there's no going back to uncertainty. I understood that. So I gave it time. The routes didn't change. Same departure. Same direction. Same endpoint. Whatever was there, it was stable. Not occasional. Not accidental. Consistent. That was enough. One evening, after she went to bed early, said she was exhausted, same tone she'd been using for weeks. I sat at the kitchen counter with my laptop and pulled up the map again. This time, I zoomed in. Street by street. House by house. Narrowing down the exact point where the route stopped. It didn't take long. The overlap was tight. Within a few houses, the data converged into a single location. A corner property. Clean driveway. Two-car garage. Nothing unusual at first glance. The kind of house you pass without remembering. I sat there for a while, just looking at it. Then I checked the property records. It was a habit from work. Verify ownership, cross-reference names. It takes a few minutes, and it removes guesswork. I wasn't expecting anything specific. Just a name. What I got was one I already knew. Mark. Full name confirmed it. Mark was someone I used to work with in Chicago before we moved. Not a close friend, but close enough that we'd spent time outside the office. A few drinks after work. A couple of group dinners. The kind of connection that fades naturally when life shifts. We hadn't spoken in years. I leaned back in the chair and let that settle. Out of everything I had considered, that hadn't been one of them. Not because it was impossible, but because it didn't fit the way I had framed the situation up to that point. Up until then, this had been contained. Something happening inside my marriage, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. This changed that. It extended beyond the two of us. Made it specific. Real in a different way. I didn't react. Didn't message him. Didn't confront her. Didn't even revisit the map again that night. I closed the laptop and sat there in the quiet kitchen, the same place where this had started, and understood something clearly. This wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was a structure. One that had been built over time, maintained carefully, and kept just out of reach long enough for me not to notice. The world didn't feel dramatic or chaotic. It felt smaller, tighter, like everything had narrowed down to a single point I could now see clearly. And once you see it like that, there's no confusion left. Just sequence. And the understanding that whatever comes next isn't about discovering the truth anymore. It's about deciding what to do with it. I didn't plan the conversation. There was no setup, no rehearsed lines, no moment where I decided this was the day everything would come out. By the time I knew the address and the name behind it, the situation didn't feel like something that required strategy anymore. It had already settled. A few mornings later, the routine played out the same way it always did. 5 a.m. alarm. Quiet movement through the bedroom. The soft click of the front door. And then, just under 2 hours later, her return. I was already in the kitchen when she came downstairs after her shower. Same pattern. Same timing. Same version of normal. She moved past me to grab a glass of water, her hair still damp, posture relaxed in that familiar, controlled way. If there was any hesitation in her, it didn't show on the surface. I poured coffee into my mug and spoke without looking up. Heading to the gym again tomorrow? She nodded. Yeah, same as usual. Her tone was steady. Practiced. I took a sip, set the mug down, and let a few seconds pass. Then I said it. To Mark's place today, or another day? The room went still. Not dramatically. There was no dropped glass, no sudden movement. Just a complete absence of motion, like everything had been paused mid-frame. I looked up at her. Her expression hadn't fully changed yet, but something underneath it had. The composure was still there, but it wasn't holding the same way, like it had lost its anchor. She didn't answer immediately. What? She said finally, but it came out thinner than she intended. I didn't repeat myself. I just held her gaze. That was enough. The silence stretched longer than any argument we'd ever had. Longer than any raised voice or sharp exchange. Because this wasn't conflict, it was exposure. And there's nothing to push against when there's no denial left that works. She started talking. Fast at first, then slower, as the words began to lose structure. Explanations, fragments, attempts to reshape what I already knew into something smaller, something less defined. I didn't interrupt, didn't correct her, didn't ask questions. I wasn't listening for information anymore. I was watching how quickly the story fell apart once it no longer had space to exist. Watching how each sentence tried to rebuild control and failed before it reached the end. At some point, she stopped making eye contact. Her voice dropped. The explanation dissolved into something quieter, less certain. I stayed where I was, hands resting on the counter, posture unchanged. Because by then, the conversation wasn't about what had happened. That part was already clear. It was about watching her realize that the version of reality she'd been maintaining no longer had anywhere to stand. And there was nothing I needed to add to that. After that morning, things didn't explode. There was no drawn-out argument, no escalation, no attempt to force clarity where it no longer mattered. The conversation ended the way it had unfolded, quietly, uneven, with her words trailing off into something that didn't require a response. From that point on, everything moved without friction. Not fast, not slow, just forward. I contacted a lawyer the same week. No urgency in my voice when I made the call. No emotion behind it. I explained the situation in simple terms, gave dates where I had them, outlined the structure as I understood it. They didn't need details beyond that. The process itself was routine for them. Predictable. That helped. Predictability removes noise. At home, nothing changed on the surface. We still moved through the same space. Same kitchen. Same hallway. Same shared routines, reduced to function. Conversations became minimal. Necessary things only. Timing, logistics, small acknowledgments that kept things operational. She sent messages at first. Long ones. Explanations, apologies, attempts to reframe what had happened into something that could still be discussed. I read them once. Didn't respond. There wasn't anything left to clarify. Over time, the messages shortened. Fewer words. Less structure. Then gaps between them. Eventually, they stopped. Her family reached out a few weeks later. Not all at once. One call at a time. Careful questions. Measured tone. They didn't ask directly in the beginning, but the direction was clear. They were trying to understand without being told. I didn't explain anything. I didn't need to. When they asked the right questions, I didn't deny them. That was enough. The situation no longer depended on what I said. It had moved beyond that. The truth had its own momentum now. It didn't require presentation or defense. I stayed focused on what needed to be handled. Accounts separated. Documents organized. Timelines aligned with what the lawyer requested. Everything done in order, without deviation. There was no satisfaction in it. But there was clarity. And clarity is quiet. By the time things reached a point where decisions were formalized, there was nothing left to argue about. No uncertainty. No hidden variables. Just the natural outcome of something that had already ended before I ever held those clean sneakers in my hands. We separated without a scene. There was no final conversation where everything was laid out one last time. No attempt to revisit what had already been made clear. By the time the paperwork moved forward, the distance between us had already settled into something permanent. She packed her things over the course of a few days. Not all at once. Small sections at a time. Clothes first. Then personal items. Things that had always been hers, but had blended into the space over the years. Each trip out to the car was quiet, efficient, without hesitation. I stayed out of the way. Not deliberately. There just wasn't a reason to be involved in it. Whatever belonged to her was already separate, even before it was physically removed. The house felt different, but not in a dramatic way. More like something had been cleared out that had already stopped being part of the structure. We didn't argue over possessions. Didn't negotiate beyond what was necessary. The lawyer handled the framework, and I followed it. Clear divisions. No unnecessary complications. No effort to hold on to anything that required discussion. At some point, she stopped coming back altogether. No announcement. No defined last day. Just absence. The routines adjusted naturally. One set of keys instead of two. One cup on the counter in the morning. One side of the bed untouched. The house didn't feel empty. It felt aligned with reality in a way it hadn't for a while. I didn't try to understand why it happened. That question came up briefly, early on, like it does for most people. But it didn't hold. There wasn't anything useful in it. Whatever reasons existed, they didn't change the outcome. They didn't rebuild anything. They didn't add clarity beyond what was already visible. So I let it go. Some things don't break in a single moment. They don't collapse with noise or impact. They just lose their structure quietly, over time, until what's left is something that looks intact from the outside, but isn't holding anything together anymore. By the time you notice it, there's nothing to fix, only something to step away from. And once you do, you realize it had already ended long before you chose to leave. Sometimes I still wake up before 5. No alarm. No reason. Just a quiet shift in the dark, like my body remembers something my mind no longer holds on to. I'll lie there for a minute, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle. Pipes. Wood. Small sounds that used to be background noise. Now they're just there. There's no tension in it anymore. No questions waiting for answers. No patterns to track. No need to listen for a door opening or wonder where someone is supposed to be. The space feels still in a way that isn't empty. It's just honest. I get up, make coffee, stand in the same kitchen where all of it started. The light comes in slow through the window. Nothing about the room has changed. Same counters. Same floor. Same place I stood holding those sneakers, trying to understand something that had already moved past me. The difference is there's nothing left to figure out. No second version of anything. Just what's real. And for the first time in a long while, that's enough. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.